The first time Elias Van heard someone say his name in that building, it wasn't a greeting, it was a warning. He'd moved to Caldwell City 3 weeks after his 23rd birthday. Chasing a junior architect position at the firm that had rejected him twice before. Third time lucky, his mother said. He'd almost believed her until he stepped off the elevator on the 14th floor and walked straight into the path of Roman Ashford. Roman didn't move. He stood in the middle of the hallway with a rolled set of blueprints under one arm and a coffee cup in the other, staring at Elias the way you'd stare at a word you couldn't pronounce, with something between irritation and compulsion. "You're the new hire," Roman said. It wasn't a question. Elias extended his hand. Roman looked at it, then looked at him, then walked away. That was Monday. By Friday, Elias had learned 3 things about Roman Ashford. First, he was the firm's senior design lead, which meant he was technically Elise's supervisor on any collaborative project. Second, he was universally described as brilliant, difficult, and not someone you wanted to upset before lunch. Third, and this one came from the receptionist, Maya, delivered in a theatrical whisper over a shared sandwich. Roman Ashford had a particular and well-documented problem with what he called performative types. "What does that mean?" Elias asked. Maya shrugged. "Men who wear their personalities like accessories." His words, not mine. "He said it at the holiday party last year." She paused. "You might want to keep a low profile." Elias nodded slowly. He was, by any reasonable measure, exactly the kind of person Roman Ashford seemed to despise. He wore vintage rings on 3 fingers. He had strong opinions about color theory that he shared unprompted. He'd once cried at an architecture exhibit because the use of natural light in a building's stairwell was genuinely, emotionally overwhelming. He was not built for low profiles. The collision happened the following Tuesday. Elias had been sketching ideas for a residential pitch loose. Exploratory stuff, nothing formal, in one of the smaller conference rooms that everyone assumed was empty after noon. He was fully absorbed in a curve he couldn't get right, humming to himself. When the door opened and Roman walked in with 3 folders and the expression of a man who had expected to be alone, they looked at each other. "This room is booked," Roman said. "There's no booking on the calendar," Elias replied. "Always use this room on Tuesdays."
"That's
not the same as booking it." Something moved through Roman's face too quick to name, and then it settled back into stone. He set his folders on the far end of the table without another word and opened the top one, clearly intending to share the space without acknowledging its inhabitant. Elias considered leaving. Then he decided, with the particular stubbornness that had carried him through to previous rejections from this very firm, that he had just as much right to be in an unbooketed conference room as anyone else. He turned back to his sketch. For 40 minutes, they worked in silence. Elias was aware of Roman the entire time, the sound of pages turning, the occasional quiet exhale, the way Roman's pen moved with complete certainty, never paused, never second-guessed. Elise's own pen kept stopping. At some point, Roman stood to look out the window. Elias watched his reflection in the glass without meaning to. Roman was tall, dark-haired, with the kind of jaw that belonged in classic film. He looked like someone who had decided early in life that comfort was a distraction and had never reconsidered. Then Roman looked at the window and caught Elias watching. Elias looked down immediately. There was a long pause. "Your proportions are off," Roman said. Elias blinked. "Excuse me?" "On the sketch. The load-bearing wall on the west side. If you push it that far into the open plan space, you lose the sightline you're trying to create." Roman hadn't moved from the window. He was still facing the glass. "I'm not trying to be critical. It's just structurally, can I see what you mean?" Another pause. Longer this time. Roman turned, crossed the room, and bent slightly over Elias's notebook. He was close enough that Elias could smell something warm and woodsy, sandalwood, maybe your cedar. Roman's finger traced the line in question without touching the paper. "Here. If you pull it back by even half a meter in the design phase, you get the natural light falling directly onto the living space instead of cutting it off." Elias looked at the sketch. He looked at where Roman's finger hovered. He picked up his pen and adjusted the line. It was immediately obviously better. "Thank you," Elias said. Roman straightened. He walked back to his own end of the table, sat down, and resumed working as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Elias just didn't know what to call it yet. The next 3 weeks were a careful geography. Roman Ashford organized his professional life the way a general organizes a battlefield strategically, with full knowledge of where every person was at all times. After the conference room incident, Elias noticed that Roman had begun to anticipate his movements with unsettling precision. If Elias arrived at the coffee station at 9:15, Roman had already been there and left. If Elias used the east stairwell, Roman suddenly had a preference for the elevator. It should have felt like being dismissed. Instead, it felt like being watched. Because the other thing Elias noticed, the thing that made him lie awake on Wednesday nights running the data like an equation he couldn't solve, was that Roman knew his name. Not just knew it. Specifically. Pointedly. In situations where no one else used names at all. In the staff meeting where Elias presented the preliminary residential concepts. Van. The eastern elevation. Not the new hire. Not a gesture. His name. When a colleague handed Roman a set of folders and accidentally included one of Elias's personal sketches, "This belongs to Elias," full first name. Delivered quietly, precisely, with no particular inflection, which somehow made it louder. When the fire alarm tested on a Thursday afternoon and everyone filed into the stairwell, Roman appeared beside Elias in the crowd and said, completely unprompted, and to no one in particular, "Elias, watch the step." It was a slightly uneven tile on the landing. Elias would absolutely have tripped on it. He had no idea how Roman knew that. Maya noticed before Elias could articulate it himself. "He hates everyone," she said over lunch one October afternoon. Watching Roman cross the lobby below them through the break room window, "He's rude to the partners." He called the senior consultant's color palette an emotional cry for help. He once told a client that their vision was architecturally irresponsible and personally insulting. She turned to look at Elias. "Says your name like it's a word he's been practicing." "That's dramatic," Elias said. "I work in a building full of architects," Maya replied. "Drama is my coping mechanism." That night, Elias sat in his apartment with a glass of water and tried to be honest with himself. He was, by nature, someone who noticed beauty in buildings, in color, in people. He'd known he was gay since he was 17, had made peace with it in the uncomplicated way that happens when you grow up in a family that simply doesn't make it a question. He'd dated not widely, but enough to know the difference between attraction and infatuation, between admiration and longing. What he felt when Roman said his name was closer to the latter, and Roman Ashford was, by every available piece of evidence, completely straight. He dated a woman named Clara for 3 years, according to office lore. He didn't speak about his private life, which made it paradoxically available for widespread speculation. He was not, as far as anyone knew, someone who occupied any ambiguous territory. Elias decided the kindest thing he could do for himself was to maintain the professional relationship and nothing more. He decided this on a Tuesday night. By Thursday morning, Roman had done something that made that resolution considerably harder too. Elias had come in early to work through a problem in the residential PJ staircase detail that was refusing to resolve itself, and found a single sheet of paper on his desk. It was a structural diagram. Precise, clean lines. A suggested approach to the exact staircase problem, worked through in full detail. With a small annotation in the corner in handwriting, Elias had come to recognize one possible solution. No context. No conversation. Just that. Elias held the paper for a long moment, then he sat down at his desk, opened his notebook, and began to work with the diagram, beside him like a compass. The pitch one, it was a significant residential development on the city's east side. The kind of project that could define a firm's profile for years. When the partners announced the decision in the Friday briefing, there was generous applause for the team, but Everyone in the room knew who had driven the design vision. What no one quite expected was what Roman said when the senior partner asked him to speak about the project's success. Roman stood. He looked at the table, not the room. He said, "The structural approach that made this work came from a conversation I had with Elias Van in the early stages. The sightline solution, the thing that made the design feel alive instead of just functional, was his instinct. I refined the engineering. He had the instinct." Sat down. The room was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then it moved on to the next agenda item, the way meetings do. But Elias sat very still, and he didn't look at Roman. He spent the rest of the meeting studying the grain of the conference table, because I've looked up, he wasn't entirely sure what would happen to his face. After the meeting, in the elevator going down to the parking structure, they were alone together for the first time in weeks. Elias had managed it by being slightly too slow, leaving the room not intentionally. Or maybe intentionally, he genuinely wasn't sure. "You didn't have to do that," Elias said. Facing the elevator doors, "I know," Roman said. "The sightline thing that came from your correction. You told me what was wrong. Knowing what's wrong isn't the same as knowing what's right." Roman's voice was low, even, "You fixed it in a way I wouldn't have thought of." The credit was accurate. Elias turned to look at him. Roman was already looking at him and then wasn't, the way a light goes off in a room when you enter it. He faced forward. His jaw was set. "Why do you know my name?" Elias asked. The question came out before he'd decided to ask it. It was not technically a sensible question. Everyone in the office knew everyone's name. But they both understood what he meant. And the understanding of that, the fact that Roman didn't pretend not to understand, is its own kind of answer. The elevator opened. Roman stepped out. "I read your application file," he said, without turning around. "When HR sent the new hire list, I read everyone's." He walked away. Elias stood in the open elevator for 3 seconds, while the doors tried to close on him. Then he stepped out, and he thought, that is an explanation that explains nothing. November brought a project that forced proximity, the residential development. Required a site visit 2 days in a town 3 hours north of Caldwell City, reviewing the existing structures that would inform the renovation plan. The team was supposed to be 4 people. 2 called out sick. 1 had a family emergency, which left Roman and Elias. The drive-up was managed by the simple expedient of Roman driving and Elias navigating, both of them pretending the silence was comfortable. The radio was on. Roman had chosen it something classical, low, and unobtrusive, which Elias filed away as new information. They stopped at a diner for dinner, because the site visit had run long, and the only restaurant near the inn was a 40-minute round trip. The diner was warm and wood-paneled and smelled like coffee and something with cinnamon. They slid into opposite sides of a booth. "You're from the West Coast," Roman said, after they'd ordered. Elias looked up. "How do you know that?" "Your application file listed. You memorized my application file." I read it carefully. "There's a difference, is there?" Roman looked at his coffee, then back at Elias. It was the longest he'd held eye contact in weeks, and there was something in it that Elias couldn't categorize, something that didn't fit the architecture of who Roman was supposed to be. "Why did you apply here twice before this?" Roman asked. "Because I wanted to work here." The rejection letters were kind, competent, but nothing distinctive. "Why come back?" Elias tilted his head. "Is this a professional question?" "I don't know what it is," Roman said, quietly, like the admission had cost him something. Elias set his fork down. He took a breath. "He chose honesty the way you choose a load-bearing wall, because the structure won't hold without it. Because I believe in what this firm could be," he said. "Not just technically. Architecturally, yes, the work is excellent. But I mean the emotional language of the spaces you build. The way the best projects in your portfolio feel like they understand the people who live in them. Not just the function. The feeling. I kept coming back because I wanted to be part of work that cares about that." Roman was very still. "That's a very specific kind of thing, too." "Believe about a firm," he said. "A very specific kind of person." Another pause. Something moved through Roman's expression deeper this time, slower. Not irritation, not distance. Something that looked. If Elias was reading it correctly and he was aware, he might be reading it with everything he wanted rather than everything was there like recognition. I know, Roman said. The food arrived. They ate. They talked about the site. Then, somehow they talked about other things, cities they'd studied in. Buildings that had changed how they thought. The specific emotional quality of late afternoon light versus early morning light, and why they were completely different architectural considerations. Roman had opinions. Strong, detailed, occasionally combative opinions. Delivered without heat, as though arguing the point was simply how he thought out loud. Elias pushed back. Roman reconsidered. Elias conceded a counterpoint. Roman almost smiled. When they walked back to the inn in the cold November air, their shoulders were close enough that Elias could feel the warmth of Roman's arm, even through their coats. Neither of them moved apart. In the morning, they returned to the site. They worked well together in the particular way that people work when they've stopped performing and started thinking. Roman pointed. Elias sketched. Elias questioned. Roman revised. By early afternoon, they had more material than they'd expected. And by the drive home, something had shifted between them, not dramatically. Not with announcement, but the way a room shifts when you open a window. The same room, more air. On the highway, with 2 hours left and the radio on low, Roman said, I need to tell you something. Elias waited. I was unfair to you when you arrived. Roman's eyes were on the road. His voice was measured. I have a why I've had difficulty with people I perceived as not taking the work seriously, and I made an assumption about you that was uncharitable and wrong. I recognized it quickly, but I handled it by creating distance instead of correcting the assumption. That wasn't right. Elias considered this. What made you reconsider the assumption? The sketch, Roman said. In the conference room, the instinct behind it. You were solving an emotional problem with a structural tool. That's not something you learn. That's something you either have or you don't. Pause. You have it. That's a very architectural apology, Elias said. Roman's mouth curved. Just slightly. Just enough. It's the only kind I know how to give. December in Caldwell City arrived the way it always does, a long gray week, and then suddenly, without warning, snow. The office holiday party was held on a Friday evening in the building's rooftop event space, which was glassed in for winter and decorated with the particular restrained elegance that a firm of architects would inevitably choose. String lights, greenery, nothing that couldn't justify itself. Structurally, Elias wore a dark green shirt and kept his rings on. He'd stopped modulating himself for the office weeks ago, and no one had mentioned it, mostly because the residential pitch wind had given him a professional credibility that made his personality someone else's problem if they had one. Roman arrived late. He always arrived late to social events, Maya had informed Elias, because he could not stand the early party small talk and calculated his entrance to minimize it. When he came in, he scanned the room. His eyes found Elias within seconds. Elias looked away. They spent an hour on opposite sides of the room, circling without approaching. Elias talked to colleagues. Roman talked to nobody. Mostly, and refilled his drink once, and stood by the window looking at the city lights with the expression of someone who found the party more interesting from a distance. Then, they arrived at the drinks table at the same time, and the geometry of the event, space, made it impossible to treat it as anything other than what it was. Nice party, Elias. Offered adequate, Roman said. He handed Elias a glass of sparkling water because Elias had mentioned, in passing, on the drive back from the site visit, that he didn't drink much. Roman had remembered. Elias took the glass and looked at it, and felt something very large and very inconvenient moving through his chest. Can we go somewhere less loud? Roman asked. They found a corner of the event space near the floor-to ceiling windows, away from the speakers. Outside, the snow was coming down steadily against the city lights. And the effect was genuinely beautiful, the kind of visual that Elias would normally want to photograph. Except right now, he was more interested in the person standing beside him. I owe you more than an architectural apology, Roman said. Without preamble, Elias turned to look at him. Roman was looking at the snow. You don't owe me anything. I do. I treated you with suspicion because he started again. I've spent a long time being certain about who I am and what I want. It's made me efficient, and it's made me unkind, particularly to people who challenge the certainty. Elias was quiet. He waited. I say your name, Roman said, because it's the first thing I want to say in a room when you're in it. And I've been pretending that's just professional familiarity, and it isn't. The snow fell. The party hummed behind them, Roman Elias said carefully. What are you telling me? Roman finally looked at him. And what was in his face was not the composed, unreadable architecture it usually was. It was open, undone, terrified, in the quiet way of someone who has never let themselves want something they couldn't blueprint in advance. I'm telling you I don't know what this is, Roman said. I've spent my entire adult life knowing exactly what I was. And in the last 3 months, I have said your name more times than I have said anyone's name in years. I leave diagrams on your desk because I can't think of another way too. He stopped. I don't know what I'm asking for. I'm aware that's insufficient. It's not insufficient, Elias said softly. It's not a coherent statement. No, but I've been listening to you make precise, coherent statements for 3 months, and this is the first one that sounded like the truth.